poor backpacker saves a woman trapped in a snowstorm unaware she's a billionaire heiress. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. As Jack stoked the fire, the warmth began to melt the chill from his bones. He looked over at the woman sitting by the fireplace, her blonde hair damp and tangled from the storm. She had removed her coat, revealing an expensive-looking blouse beneath, but Jack wasn't paying attention to that. He was more focused on the strange feeling creeping over him. Something about her just didn't add up. She was clearly out of place in the wilderness, alone and fighting a snowstorm. He shook his head, dismissing the thought. She was probably just lost like he had been on his own adventures before. He turned back to the fire, trying to keep his mind off her and the strange connection he felt. The crackling of the fire filled the cabin, and for a while, neither of them said anything. The silence felt comfortable, yet heavy at the same time. After a few minutes, the woman broke the silence, her voice soft but clear. The morning after the storm, Jack woke up to the soft light of the early sun filtering through the small cabin windows. The snow had stopped falling, but the landscape outside still looked harsh and unforgiving. He rubbed his eyes, stretching as he sat up, the warmth of the fire from last night still lingering in the air. Isabelle was sitting near the window, her blonde hair now dry and neatly styled, her eyes distant as she gazed out at the snow-covered mountains. She had barely slept, Jack noticed, but she hadn't said a word about it. The silence between them had been heavy, filled with the weight of unspoken things. Jack wasn't sure what to say. She had opened up to him the night before, revealing her true identity as a billionaire heiress. He was still processing that revelation, trying to understand why someone with so much wealth and privilege would end up stranded in a snowstorm, seeking solitude in the middle of nowhere. He couldn't quite shake the feeling that there was more to her story than she had told him. He stood up, stretching again, and walked over to the small kitchen area, where Isabelle had already started making coffee. She turned when she heard him approach, offering him a smile that seemed faint but genuine. "I didn't mean to keep you up all night," she said softly, her voice a little hoarse. "It's just, I've never really opened up to anyone like that before." Jack nodded, his mind still racing. "You don't have to explain," he said, his voice reassuring. "I get it." Isabelle looked at him, her blue eyes searching his face, as if weighing something in her mind. She set the coffee pot down and walked over to him. "You're a good man, Jack," she said quietly, her gaze softening. "Most people would have just walked past me in the storm, but you didn't. You saved me." Jack felt a warmth spread through him, but it was quickly replaced with unease. He didn't want to be praised for simply doing the right thing. He wasn't a hero, he was just a guy trying to make his way through life. "I just did what anyone would have done," he said, shrugging. Isabelle didn't seem to buy it. She took a step closer to him, her eyes locked on his. "No, Jack. You didn't," she said, her voice firm. "You're different. I can feel it." Jack felt a knot form in his stomach as he looked into her eyes. He could see the sincerity in them, but it only made him more uncomfortable. He didn't want her to see him as something more than he was a poor backpacker trying to survive. He wasn't looking for anything from her, especially not a deeper connection. But as she stood there, so close, he couldn't help but feel a strange pull toward her, something he couldn't explain. "Isabelle," Jack began, his voice uncertain. "I don't know what you're looking for, but I'm not the guy you think I am." Isabelle's gaze softened, and she took a small step back. "I'm not looking for anything, Jack," she said quietly. I just want to be understood. For once, I want to be seen for who I really am, not the image people have of me." Jack frowned, confused. "But what does that mean? You're a billionaire heiress, Isabelle. You have everything most people dream of." She shook her head, the sadness in her eyes deepening. "You don't understand, Jack," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Money doesn't make you happy. It just isolates you from the world. People see my wealth, but they don't see the loneliness that comes with it. They don't see the pressure, the expectations. They don't see the woman behind the title." Jack felt a surge of empathy for her. But at the same time, he felt overwhelmed. He had never been around someone like Isabelle, someone so rich, so powerful, yet so vulnerable. "I'm sorry," he said softly, not knowing what else to say. Isabelle gave him a sad smile, her eyes flickering with emotion. "It's not your fault," she whispered. I've been running away from everything for so long, Jack. But here, with you, I feel like I can finally breathe, like I can be real." Jack didn't know how to respond to that. He wasn't sure what it was about Isabelle that made him feel so conflicted he wanted to help her, to protect her. But at the same time, he felt like he was losing himself in the process. He had his own struggles, his own dreams. But for the first time in a long while, he wasn't sure where he fit in the grand scheme of things. Isabelle turned away from him, her gaze drifting back to the window. "I never asked for this life, Jack," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't know how to escape it." Jack watched her in silence, feeling a growing sense of helplessness. He wished he had the answers for her, wished he could take away her pain, but he knew he couldn't. All he could do was listen, and maybe, just maybe, help her find a way out of the storm, both the one outside and the one inside her heart. As the days passed, the storm outside had finally settled, but the tension between Jack and Isabelle seemed to linger, hanging in the air like the snow that still covered the ground. The cabin, though warm, felt more like a temporary refuge for both of them, two strangers caught in a storm of their own making. Jack had been giving Isabelle space, not wanting to push her into sharing more than she was ready for. But the silence between them was becoming harder to ignore. Each day, she spent hours staring out the window, her mind somewhere far away, lost in her own thoughts. Jack, on the other hand, tried to stay busy, chopping wood for the fire or organizing his gear. His mind kept returning to the conversation they had shared, what Isabelle had told him about her life, her loneliness, and how she felt trapped in a world that never saw her for who she truly was. It was a lot to process, and Jack wasn't sure if he was the right person to help her through it. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized he couldn't just leave her like this, isolated and alone. He had to do something. One afternoon, after a quiet lunch, Jack made his way outside, braving the cold for some fresh air. The sun had come out briefly, casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground. As he walked along the edge of the forest, his thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps crunching in the snow behind him. He turned, surprised to see Isabelle standing there, her arms crossed, her breath visible in the cold air. "Jack," she said, her voice a little uncertain. "Can we talk?" He nodded, a little taken aback by her sudden appearance. "Of course," he replied, stepping aside to make room for her beside him. Isabelle hesitated for a moment, looking down at the ground, then up at the sky. "I've been thinking about everything you said," she began, her voice softer now. "About how I need to stop running away. How I need to face my reality." Jack remained silent, letting her speak. "And I think you're right," she continued, her tone thoughtful. "I've spent so much time hiding from my life, from the expectations, the pressure. I forgot who I really am." Jack turned to look at her, his heart tightening. He could see the sincerity in her eyes, but he also saw the pain she was carrying. She was trying to come to terms with something much bigger than both of them. "But I don't know how to change," she added, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know how to let go of the life that has defined me for so long." Jack took a deep breath, stepping closer to her. "You don't have to do it alone, Isabelle," he said gently. "You've got a choice now. You can let go of what's been holding you back, or you can keep running." Isabelle looked at him, her eyes wide, as if weighing his words. "But what about you?" she asked. "What about your life? I don't want to drag you into this mess. You've been kind to me, but I don't want to pull you into a world that's not yours." Jack smiled softly, shaking his head. "I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to worry about me." Isabelle blinked, her gaze flickering with something like hope, but she quickly looked away. "I don't even know where to start," she whispered. Jack reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Start by letting go of the past. Start by living for yourself, not for anyone else. I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you that you deserve more than just a life of expectations." Isabelle was silent for a moment, the weight of his words settling between them. Finally, she looked up at him, her eyes clearer, more focused. "Maybe you're right," she said quietly. Maybe it's time to stop pretending. Time to figure out who I really am, not who everyone expects me to be. Jack nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. He wasn't sure what the future held for either of them, but for the first time since they met, he felt like Isabelle was finally seeing herself in a new light. They stood there for a while, the cold air surrounding them, but neither of them seemed to mind. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It felt like a moment of understanding, a moment where both of them had finally started to accept the truth about their lives. Isabelle took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack looked at her, surprised. "For what?" "For not giving up on me," she said softly. "For being patient, for showing me that there's more to life than what I've known. I don't know what comes next, but I think I'm ready to figure it out." Jack smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. "I'm glad to hear that," he said, his voice full of warmth. "You don't have to face it alone." As they turned back toward the cabin, Jack couldn't help but feel that something had shifted between them. They weren't just two strangers stuck in a snowstorm anymore. They were two people, both on their own journeys of self-discovery, and maybe, just maybe, they could help each other along the way. The following days were a quiet shift for both Jack and Isabelle. They no longer felt like strangers, but rather like two people who had started to understand each other in a way that was deeper than just survival. The bond they had formed in the storm was beginning to grow into something more, something real. Each day, they spent time together, talking, laughing, and sharing stories of their lives, their hopes, and their dreams. Isabelle still spent time reflecting on her past, the world she had run from, but now she was starting to see things differently. Jack had shown her a side of life she hadn't realized was possible, a life where she wasn't defined by her family's name or the wealth that surrounded her. One evening, as the fire crackled softly in the background, Jack looked over at Isabelle, who was sitting by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. He had grown accustomed to her presence, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the time they had here together was slipping away. He knew they couldn't stay in the cabin forever. The world outside was calling them back, and eventually, they would have to face their realities. "Isabelle," Jack said, his voice cutting through the silence, "what happens when we leave here? I mean, what comes next for you?" Isabelle didn't turn right away, but he saw the shift in her posture, the tension that returned to her shoulders. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to believe I can start over. I want to be the person I've always hidden from, but I'm scared. Scared of what will happen if I really let go of everything I've known." Jack stood up and walked over to her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to know all the answers right now," he said softly. "You've got time. The important thing is that you've made the decision to stop running. That's the first step." Isabelle looked up at him, her eyes searching his face, as if she were trying to find something she had been missing for so long. "You really think I can do it?" she asked, her voice thick with doubt. Jack smiled warmly at her, his hand still resting on her shoulder. "I don't just think you can do it, Isabelle," he said, his voice firm with conviction. "I know you can. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. You just need to believe it." Isabelle looked at him, her expression softening, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of hope begin to stir inside her. She wasn't sure how everything would unfold, but for the first time, she felt like maybe she could take control of her own story. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for showing me that there's more to life than what I thought, for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Jack's heart swelled at her words, but he kept his voice steady. "You've got it in you, Isabelle. You just needed someone to remind you." The next day, as the cabin grew quieter with the sound of the wind outside, Jack and Isabelle packed their things. They both knew it was time to leave. The storm had passed, and the road ahead was waiting for them. Jack, feeling more connected to Isabelle than ever before, knew that this chapter of their journey had come to an end. But there was something in him that told him it wasn't the end of their story. As they loaded their gear into Jack's old truck, Isabelle paused for a moment, looking back at the cabin. "I never thought I'd be leaving here with so much more than I came with," she said, her voice reflective. Jack looked at her and smiled. "It's not about where we go. It's about what we carry with us. And you've got more strength in you than you realize." Isabelle nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. She climbed into the truck, and Jack followed, starting the engine. As they pulled away from the cabin, the mountains fading into the distance behind them, they both knew that their journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. Isabelle looked out the window, the world now seeming different to her, and Jack felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that, in some small way, he had helped her find her way. There was still a lot to figure out, still a lot of challenges ahead, but for the first time, Isabelle didn't feel like she was facing them alone. She had a new perspective, a new sense of self, and most importantly, she had someone who believed in her. And that was a start. As they drove through the snowy landscape, Jack turned to Isabelle, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "So, what's next for you?" he asked, his tone light but genuine. Isabelle smiled, her eyes gleaming with a newfound sense of determination. "Next?" she said softly. "I think it's time I figured that out. And for once, I'm ready to start living for myself." Jack nodded, his heart lifting with pride. They didn't know what the future held, but together they were ready to face it. As Jack and Isabelle continued their journey, the truck's tires crunched along the snow-packed road, the winter landscape passing by in a blur of white. The air outside had a sharp bite to it. But inside the truck, there was a quiet warmth, a sense of peace that hadn't been there before. For Isabelle, every mile they covered felt like a step further away from the life she had known, and the weight of it all was starting to sink in. She had spent so many years trapped in a gilded cage, constantly surrounded by wealth and expectation. But now, with Jack beside her, she was beginning to understand what it truly meant to be free. Jack glanced over at Isabelle, who was staring out the window, her face illuminated by the soft light of the truck's interior. He could see the change in her. She was different now, no longer the distant, reserved woman he had met in the snowstorm. She seemed lighter, almost as if a burden had been lifted from her shoulders. But Jack also knew that this wasn't the end of her journey. There were still hurdles to face, decisions to make, and the real world was waiting for her. They had talked a lot during their time at the cabin, about her family, her wealth, and the suffocating expectations she had grown up with. Isabelle had shared things with him that she had never told anyone before, and Jack had listened, offering no judgments, just understanding. "You know," Jack said, breaking the silence, "I think the hardest part isn't figuring out where you want to go. It's realizing that you don't have to be the person everyone expects you to be." Isabelle turned to him, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I never really had a choice in that, did I?" she replied softly. "I was always being pushed in one direction, never really allowed to decide for myself." Jack shook his head. "No one can control your choices unless you let them. It's up to you to decide what you want for your life. It's not about fitting into some mold, Isabelle. It's about being true to yourself." Isabelle's eyes softened as she looked at him, her gaze filled with gratitude. "I think I'm starting to understand that now," she said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "It's scary, but I think I can do it." Jack smiled at her, his heart lifting with pride. He had seen the change in her over the past few days, the way she had started to take control of her own path. And it filled him with a quiet sense of hope. "You don't have to have it all figured out right now," Jack said. "One step at a time. That's how it works. You just have to trust yourself." Isabelle nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle within her. For so long, she had been searching for approval from everyone but herself. But now she realized that it was her own approval she needed most. The truck continued on its way, the road stretching ahead, endless and open. Isabelle had no clear plan yet, but for the first time, she didn't feel lost. The future was a wide-open space, waiting for her to fill it with whatever she chose. "I never imagined I'd be here, like this, with you," Isabelle said, her voice quiet. Jack glanced at her, his expression soft. "I didn't imagine it either," he replied, his voice gentle. "But I'm glad it happened. I think we were both meant to cross paths, you know?" Isabelle turned her head to look at him, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I never thought I'd meet someone like you," she said. "Someone who's just real. No pretense, no hidden agenda. It's been eye-opening." Jack felt a warmth spread through him at her words. "You're not so different from me, Isabelle," he said. "You just had to learn how to see it for yourself." Isabelle looked out the window again. the weight of the world lifting from her shoulders. She wasn't sure where her journey would lead her, but she knew she wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful, ready to take on whatever came next. As they continued driving, the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting a soft, golden light across the snow. The road ahead was uncertain, but Isabelle no longer felt afraid of it. She had found something she hadn't even known. She was searching for her own strength, her own path. And Jack. Jack was part of that journey now, whether they realized it or not. He had shown her a glimpse of what it meant to truly live, not in the shadow of expectations, but in the light of her own choices. Isabelle wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing. It was hers to create, and that thought filled her with more peace than she had ever known. "I think this is just the beginning," she said softly, more to herself than to Jack. Jack didn't say anything at first, just nodded as he focused on the road. But when he looked over at her, he couldn't help but smile. "Yeah, I think so too." Oh, the next few weeks were a blur of new beginnings for Isabelle. She had made the decision to leave behind the life she knew, the wealth and expectations that had defined her existence. With Jack by her side, she started to take steps toward rediscovering who she was, outside of the title, the family name, and the pressures of her past. The first few days after leaving the cabin were filled with uncertainty, but each passing moment brought a sense of clarity that Isabelle had never felt before. She had rented a small apartment in a quiet town, far away from the corporate buildings and the lavish mansions that had once been her world. Jack had helped her settle in, and though he didn't say much, she could tell that he was rooting for her, for this new version of herself she was trying to create. Isabelle spent her days focusing on herself, learning new skills, reading books that weren't assigned to her by anyone else, and meeting new people who didn't know her as the billionaire heiress. She worked at a small cafe, a job that brought her back to basics. At first, it felt strange, as if she were pretending to be someone she wasn't, but soon enough, she realized it was exactly what she needed. It wasn't the money that mattered, it was the sense of independence, the feeling of contributing to something that had nothing to do with her family's legacy. Jack visited her often, and each time, he brought with him a sense of calm. His life had never been easy, and he had never expected anything to come easy. He had always believed that hard work and dedication were the only ways to achieve success, but with Isabelle, he started to see things differently. She was learning to take control of her life, to step away from the wealth that had always been her safety net. It wasn't about what she could buy or what others expected of her. It was about finding peace, about being true to herself. One evening, as they sat on the small porch of her apartment, the sun setting behind them, Isabelle looked over at Jack, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I used to think that money was the answer to everything. I thought that if I had everything I needed, I'd be happy. But now I see that it's not about what you have, but who you are and the choices you make." Jack turned to her, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You're figuring it out," he said softly. "It's not an easy road, but you're on the right path." Isabelle's eyes softened as she looked at him. "You've shown me more than I ever thought possible, Jack. I didn't think I could ever escape my past, but you've made me realize that I don't have to be defined by it. I'm starting to see the world differently, and I feel like I'm finally living for myself." Jack's heart swelled with pride as he looked at her. "That's all you can do," he said quietly. "Live for yourself. And I'm proud of you for doing that." Isabelle smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She had come so far, from a life of luxury and isolation to this small, humble apartment, where she had begun to build a life that was truly her own. She had learned that the key to happiness wasn't in the things she owned or the status she held, it was in the relationships she built, the love she gave, and the freedom to be herself. As the days turned into weeks, Isabelle's confidence grew. She made new friends at the cafe, joined community events, and even started volunteering at a local shelter. She felt more alive than she ever had before. Jack continued to support her, but he also made sure to give her space to grow on her own. He knew that the woman she was becoming was someone she had to discover for herself. One evening, Isabelle found herself standing in front of a local art gallery, an idea suddenly sparking in her mind. She had always loved art, and when she was younger, she had dreamt of becoming a painter. But her family had pushed her toward business, toward the family empire, and her dreams had faded into the background. But now, with a newfound sense of freedom, she felt the pull to pursue her passion again. She turned to Jack, who had been standing beside her, waiting patiently. "What if I opened my own art studio?" she asked, her voice filled with excitement. Jack looked at her, his eyes lighting up. "Isn't that what you've always wanted?" Isabelle nodded. "Yes, but I never thought it was possible. I thought I had to follow a certain path, but now I realize that the only path I need to follow is the one that makes me happy." Jack smiled, his voice full of encouragement. "Then do it, Isabelle. Follow your heart. You deserve it." Isabelle felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She had spent so many years following a path that wasn't her own, but now, with Jack's support, she felt ready to take the leap. The future was uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure. She was going to live it on her own terms. As they walked away from the gallery, Isabelle's heart was full of hope. She wasn't the same woman who had been trapped in a world of wealth and expectations. She was someone new, someone who had finally found the courage to follow her dreams. And as Jack walked beside her, she knew that whatever came next, she was ready to face it with strength, with grace, and with the freedom to be herself. It had been several months since Isabelle decided to follow her heart and pursue her dream of opening an art studio. And the transformation she had undergone during that time was nothing short of remarkable. The small space she had rented in the heart of the town was now a reflection of her newfound freedom, a place where she could truly be herself. The walls were lined with her artwork, vibrant and full of life, something she had never thought possible while living under the shadow of her family's expectations. She had taken the leap, leaving behind the world of luxury that had once defined her, and now she was carving out her own path, one brushstroke at a time. The studio had become a sanctuary for Isabelle, a space where she could explore her creativity without the pressure of being someone she wasn't. She was no longer the heiress of a powerful family. She was simply Isabelle, an artist, living her truth. As the weeks passed, her confidence grew, and with it, her sense of belonging. The people in the town, the friends she had made, embraced her for who she was, not for the name she carried or the wealth she had once possessed. It was a humbling experience for her, but also a deeply fulfilling one. One afternoon, as Isabelle sat in her studio, sketching out a new piece, there was a knock on the door. She looked up to see Jack standing in the doorway, a smile on his face. It had been a while since he'd visited. He had his own work to focus on, but he always made time to check in on her. Isabelle returned his smile, her heart warming at the sight of him. "Hey, Jack," she greeted him, setting down her sketchpad and walking over to him. "What's up?" Jack stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room, taking in the artwork that filled the space. "This place is incredible, Isabelle," he said, his voice full of admiration. "You've really made something special here." Isabelle smiled, a bit shyly. "It's been a journey, but I'm proud of it. I never thought I could do something like this, something that was just for me, not for anyone else." Jack nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I think you've always had it in you. You just needed the chance to see it." Isabelle's heart fluttered at his words. He had always believed in her, even when she couldn't believe in herself. Jack had been her anchor, the one who had helped her see her own worth when she was lost in a world of expectations and obligations. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice full of emotion. "I couldn't have done it without you. You've shown me what it means to live for myself, to pursue what makes me happy." Jack reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. "You did all the hard work, Isabelle. I just helped you see the path. You're the one who walked it." Isabelle looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "You know," she said, her voice taking on a playful tone, "I think it's time you finally take some credit for helping me. You've been so supportive, but I think you deserve to see the results." Jack raised an eyebrow, clearly curious. "What do you mean?" Isabelle stepped back, her eyes twinkling with excitement. "Come on, I've got something to show you." She led him outside the studio and down the street, towards a small building that had recently come up for sale. It was a simple structure, nothing too extravagant, but to Isabelle, it held immense potential. She turned to Jack, her eyes sparkling. "What do you think?" Jack looked at the building, then back at Isabelle, clearly puzzled. "What are we doing here?" Isabelle's smile grew wider. "I think it's time for the next step, Jack. I want to open a gallery, a place where I can share my work with the world, and maybe even help other artists find their voice too." Jack's eyes widened in surprise. "A gallery?" he repeated, his voice filled with admiration. Isabelle, this is incredible. I'm so proud of you. Isabelle's heart swelled at his words. She had come so far. From being trapped in a life she didn't choose to now creating something entirely her own. It was a dream she hadn't even dared to imagine, but now, standing in front of this building, it felt within her reach. I want to give back, Jack. Isabelle continued, her voice full of passion. I want to create a space where artists can come together, where they can support each other and grow. I want to show the world that art isn't just about fame or fortune. It's about expression, connection, and community. Jack smiled, his pride in her evident. You're going to do amazing things, Isabelle. I have no doubt. Isabelle looked at him, her heart full. She had learned so much in such a short time. It wasn't just about leaving behind the life of luxury. It was about creating a life that was true to herself. A life that was rich with meaning, passion, and purpose. And as she stood there, with Jack by her side, she knew that the best was yet to come. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, Isabelle felt ready to face it, confident that whatever came her way, she would have the strength to handle it. Together, they walked back to the studio, knowing that this was just the beginning of the next chapter. A chapter where Isabelle would continue to discover herself, pursue her dreams, and inspire others along the way. Months passed since Isabelle had made the decision to open her own gallery, and the transformation in her life continued to unfold in ways she never thought possible. The small, humble building she had purchased turned into a vibrant space filled with art, color, and life. The gallery, which started as a dream, had quickly become a symbol of everything she had worked toward, a space where artists could come together, share their work, and be seen for who they truly were. Isabelle had poured her heart into the gallery, curating exhibitions, hosting events, and creating a community where creativity and authenticity could flourish. The walls were adorned with her own paintings, but also the works of other local artists she had met along the way. Isabelle had found her voice, not just as an artist, but as a mentor, a guide, and a leader in a community that valued passion over status. Jack, of course, had been there every step of the way, offering his unwavering support. He helped her set up the gallery, encouraged her during moments of doubt, and celebrated with her as each milestone passed. But it wasn't just his support that had made the difference. It was the quiet belief he had in her, the kind of belief that helped her believe in herself when she had nothing left but hope. One evening, as they stood together at the gallery's opening event, Isabelle took a moment to look around. The space was filled with people, artists, friends, and strangers alike, all there to celebrate the art, the vision, and the community they had helped build. The energy was electric, and Isabelle couldn't help but feel a deep sense of accomplishment. She had done it. She had created something meaningful, something that was truly hers. You did it, Jack said, his voice low and full of pride as he stood beside her. Isabelle smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. We did it, she corrected him gently, her eyes meeting his. I couldn't have done it without you. Jack gave her a small, knowing smile. You always had it in you, Isabelle. I'm just glad I got to be a part of it. Isabelle turned to him, her smile widening. I don't think I ever told you how much you've meant to me. You've shown me what it means to really live, to not be afraid of following my own path, even when it feels uncertain. I'm not the same person I was when we met, and I owe a lot of that to you. Jack looked at her, his expression softening. You gave yourself the strength to change, Isabelle. I just helped you see that it was possible. Isabelle nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude. She had come so far from the woman who had once been trapped in her family's world, suffocated by expectations and obligations. Now, she stood in a place she had created, surrounded by people who respected her for who she was, not for what she had. And as the evening went on, as people mingled and admired the artwork, Isabelle realized that the journey she had started wasn't just about leaving her old life behind. It was about embracing the person she had always been inside, someone capable of great things. She had learned to trust herself, to take risks, and to open her heart to new possibilities. And that was just the beginning. The gallery was thriving, but so was Isabelle. She had become the woman she had always wanted to be, and the road ahead felt full of endless potential. Jack was right by her side, but now it was her turn to lead her own life. As the night came to a close, Isabelle stood outside the gallery, the cool evening air brushing against her skin. She looked up at the stars, feeling a sense of peace she had never known before. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid of it. She had found her place in the world, and she was ready to embrace whatever came next. Jack joined her, standing beside her in comfortable silence. "You're ready for whatever comes next," he said quietly, his voice full of warmth and certainty. Isabelle smiled, her eyes sparkling in the moonlight. "I am," she replied softly, her voice steady and full of confidence. "And I'm ready to make the most of it." They stood together for a moment longer, taking in the peaceful night, knowing that their journey wasn't over. It was only just beginning. With the gallery, with their lives, and with each other, they had found something worth holding on to. And that, Isabelle realized, was the greatest adventure of all.